boys and girls. This is Holland Chambers Biology bringing to you Genetics Lecture 4, which deals with epistasis and multiple alleles, as well as a few other things that I threw in here. Now, keep in mind, please stop the video at any time to write this stuff down as you go. And as a review of some of these topics that we are going to be covering, I do recommend that you watch Amoeba Sisters, which deals with incomplete dominance, polygenic, and epistasis as well. So then that way you guys get just a different side of or way to explain these things. So maybe you might understand it better with them versus, say, the way that I do it. Plus they have really cool, fun, pictures and stuff like that. So the first thing I want to talk about is number 1, epistasis. Now, epistasis, please write down, means to override. So what we're going to be dealing with here is a gene that you inherit. And remember, a gene is a sequence of letters from your DNA that you inherit that can actually override and alter the phenotypic expression of a second gene. Okay, so you're inheriting one gene that says, for example, you have normal pigmentation in your skin, and then you get a second gene that says, nope, you're not going to have normal pigmentation, and then suddenly you're an albino. Okay, so what we're dealing with here is, for example, your chromosomes have 2 genes. Okay, so remember, these represent your alleles. So big B is going to represent our dominant trait for black fur, and then little c is going to be representing, big C represents the trait or allele combination that says that that black fur will be deposited. Okay, little b represents that you have brown fur. So if you get little b on your chromosomes that you inherit from your parents, you will have brown fur. However, if that second gene on your chromosome is little c, that means no pigment will be deposited. And even though you have the genetic disposition for black or brown fur, if you inherit 2 little c's, no pigment is going to be deposited, and your fur, aka your rabbit, will be all white and hence an albino. So do me a favor, go ahead and stop the video, write down this data table as well as your example chromosomes before we move on. Okay, so what I'm talking about here, guys, is once you inherit these chromosomes from your parents, one from your mom, one from your dad, what it looks like genotypically, okay, so genotypically is big B, little b, so one from mom, one from dad, little c, one from mom, one from dad. And so when you read it, big B, little b, according to our data table, we should have black fur. But because we inherited 2 little c's, that second gene overrides this dominant trait, and now we are an albino. That is epistasis. Okay, so just remember, epistasis means to override, and it's a gene that we inherit that will override dominant or recessive traits and completely come up with something different. Okay, now paleotrophy is pretty cool. Paleotrophy means to double up. All right, so please go ahead and again stop the video, write this down. When multiple phenotypic effects occur using the same alleles, little a, which can cause 2 different physical traits to be expressed. So you guys have been taught so far that when you inherit, let's say for example, little a, that means that you have like blue eyes, okay, for example. And that's it. It's 2 alleles, aka 1 gene, and you get 1 trait. That's typical monohybrid cross. But what I'm telling you right now is that, let's spice this up, paleotrophic traits, you inherit little a, and instead of getting just blue eyes, you have blue eyes and freckles together, all at the same time, okay? And that's what we're talking about paleotrophy. You get a 2 for 1. So let's talk about real life, all right? So in tigers, realistically, in tigers, if the tiger inherits a little a from mom and a little a from dad, which gives them a genotype of little a, not only is the tiger albino, but because little a is a paleotrophic allele combination, it will make the tigers also cross-eyed. True story. So all albino tigers in the wild or captive are all cross-eyed. Okay, so kind of cool. All right, next one here is what's known as polygenic traits. So keep in mind, poly means many, genic or gene means gene. So again, take a second, stop the video. I know this is a lot of information, so write this down first before we continue. Okay, so polygenic traits. Many genes is one trait. So it takes a lot of letters, aka a lot of gene combinations, A and B and C and D, to give rise to just one trait, which is height. So height is not dominant recessive, big B, little b. Height is A and B and C and D all put together to create height. Now this polygenic trait, it ends up creating what we consider a bell-shaped curve, where you end up getting people that are 5'2", 5'4", 5'6", 7'0", 8'0", like all these different combinations where you end up having an average height of the population, but you also have people that are really, really short and people that are really, really tall, okay? Because there is no are you tall or are you short? So think about this for a second here, guys. I'm 5'7", and I think I'm tall. But I'm not really tall because my dad is 6'4". He's tall. But yet I think I'm tall. So therefore, this idea of being tall, there's not one number point for tall. There's 5'7" to 6'2" to 6'5" to 7'0". Those are all tall, okay? And so therefore, because there's many different choices for tall here, that's in lieu of the fact that there is no dominant recessive anymore, okay? There's a mixture of dominant recessive from many genes that give rise to this one height, 5'7", okay? Now, traits are produced by the interaction of several genes and is strongly influenced by epigenetics. So height is not just, hey, you're born to be 5'7", but height can actually get influenced by by nature versus nurture. So for example, if your genetic disposition was to be tall, you were supposed to be 5'8" genetically when you were born. But then you started to become a gymnastics athlete when you were 4 years old, and you made it into, say, the Olympics by the time you're 10. Gymnastics actually impacts and alters your height. So gymnastics actually made you 5'2" and not 5'8", okay? Same thing with, say, brown hair. So, for example, when I moved to Hawaii for 2 years, I moved there with kind of darker brown hair. When I lived in Hawaii, which it has very intense sunlight, my hair turned blonde. So genetically, I have brown hair, but because of the environment of living in Hawaii for 2 years, my hair ended up turning blonde. Okay, so just keep in mind that these polygenetic traits can be greatly influenced by epigenetics, or nature versus nurture. Okay, last one we're going to talk about here is called multiple alleles. All right, so multiple alleles simply means multiple, many, alleles, letters. So we have many different letters or options for this one trait. All right, and the trait we're going to talk about today is blood. So blood, for example, instead of just being big A, little a, we actually have 3 different options to choose from. We have A, we have B, and we have O. Okay, so when we put these 3 letters, A, B, and O together, we end up creating 4 different options because blood, come to find out, is also co-dominant. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the first blood type here. Now, again, please make sure to stop the video and write this all down, because you will need to know this, and this is a great reference tool to kind of come back to. So the phenotype is actually called A blood, and A blood is dominant. The genotype is big A, or big A, O. And this is how we're going to learn this in this class. Technically, it's IA, but we're not going to worry about the technical. We're just going to keep it simple. Okay, so AA and AO. Now, what this means is that your blood, so it's like this, has these enzymes, let's say these little squares on them, that can only recognize other blood with square enzymes. Okay? Now, B blood is different. So if you guys notice, it's got the blood, but we have dots around the blood versus squares. So B blood is also a dominant trait. Therefore, he is BB and BO. If you guys haven't figured this out yet, our O's are recessive. Okay? So if A is dominant and B is dominant, we've got squares and circles on our blood, then when you put A and B together, guess what? You get squares and circles on your blood, and therefore, because these are both dominant, A and B are considered co-dominant. So its genotype is AB. Okay, so there's no O here, it's just A and B. The least recessive is actually O. All right, so O is the most recessive, it's just OO, which means that O can go into any one of these. So I can donate, so this is where your arrows come into play, I can donate blood to all these other bloods if I'm O. Why? Because I'm recessive. Therefore, it's the universal donor, okay? Whereas AB blood can take blood from anybody, and therefore, it's a universal, like, recipient. They can take blood from anybody. So if you're AB blood and you get in a car accident, you can take blood from anybody. But if you're O blood, you can't take blood from anybody. You're recessive. If you get A blood, your body will fight it off. If you get B blood, your body will fight it off. And your blood will literally fight with each other, and that can cause death. Okay? Your body doesn't recognize these other squares and circles. So O blood must receive blood from other O donors. So that's why it's really rare, and it's also, this is why it's important to understand blood, because you don't want to give blood to somebody and then kill them because their body doesn't recognize it. All right. So here's a quick. Let me just go ahead and show you this. This video is going to be broken apart into a part 1, part 2. So this is just part 1. So make sure to the rest of the video will be in part 2. Okay. So our first example of blood or multiple alleles is that if you have a woman with AB blood and a man with A blank blood, so we don't know what he is yet, but you know his child is B blood, but you don't know if he's BB or BO, and you don't know if the man's AA or AO. So what you want to do in the problem is that you want to leave these blank. So if you guys notice, I put blanks in my problem. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in, drop it down, bring it over, what I know, and then I'm going to fill in the other ones. So let's say that this was AA, then if this was an A, that would be an A, that would be an A, there would be no baby in here that would be a B. Because in order to be B, you have to be BB or BO. So I'm going to cross that guy off, and I'm going to try AO. So if the dad was AO, then I go O, O, and O, voila. Here's one square that gives rise to a B blood child, which matches what I've been asking. Okay, so then that's how you guys go about to solve this. So feel free to fill these in. Okay, so once you know mom and dad, then you're going to say, okay, well, what about the brown and the blue eyes? Well, this one's pretty easy. If you know that brown is dominant, okay, they have brown eyes, but the baby has blue, the only way to give rise to a blue baby is if both parents are heterozygous and both parents give that recessive little b. Now, here's the tricky part, last bit. Mom is AB genetically. That means that she's AB blood phenotypically. Okay, so phenotype. If dad genetically is AO blood, phenotype is just A blood. So AA or AO is the genotype, but A blood is the phenotype. B blood, it can be BB or BO. Okay? So make sure to watch part 2. We're going to talk about rabbits. And this is Holland Chambers checking out.